right, and in this session, we're going to do a really brief overview of the wash. And first of all, what do I mean by wash? Basically, it's any area of watercolor pigment that's laid down at once. And the reason that's an advantage originally was when people were going out into the field and they were, just sketching landscapes or whatever they were sketching, they had to get different values very quickly down. And you could get that with your pencil or pen, but with watercolor, it was a lot quicker, or ink, to wash over those sections that they wanted to have tinted. And so that's where we get the term wash from. But now it's used all the time for modern watercolor painting, and we use it for all colors, all types. And once again, it just means any area of pigment that's laid down at once. And then when you let that dry and put another one on top, that wash becomes known as a glaze. And we'll do that in our next session. But right now, we're just going to review some very basic kinds of washes that we come across when we're painting. And the first one is going to be a flat wash. And when I say flat, it just means that it's uniform. There's no variation in color or tone. And so what we do is we got everything set up just like we did from our materials class. And we get out some water. And get out some pigment. I'm just going to use this red right here. And when you're making a wash, it is of paramount importance to make sure you're doing making about twice the amount of paint than you think you would need. So we're going to make a lot of paint here. And if you notice, I'm just using this water pot and not this one. This one I always keep clean, as I mentioned before. And it might take a little bit because this is a teeny tiny set. And once again, this is great for going out in the field, but if you're going to be doing really large watercolor paintings, something this tiny is a little bit more tricky to use. But for our purposes, for smaller, this size and smaller, it's just fine. But it can take, as you can see, I'm doing this in real time, it can take a little while to add up enough water and pigment to get ready for this. It's going to be really nice and juicy, so you just keep adding until you've got enough. Okay. And you don't want it too wishy-washy, so that's the other trick, is getting this all filled up. That's just about right. So now that we've got enough water here, I'm going to grab a tissue in this hand. It's just a habit of mine. I always like to have it here so I can control, if I need to, how much wetness is in here. You can also put it on the edge here, but so here's what we'll do. We'll get a nice big gooey amount. And I've made, I made 4 little squares here, and you can hand draw them out, or you can just take a little box. This is a tea box, and I just went around them really quick to save time. And you don't even need to draw a box, but I find that it's easier when you're first learning to pretend like these are the edges of your paper. And if you go a little over, it's okay. So we'll soak that up, and here's what we do. Lots and lots of pigment. And we'll start here. And it's on an angle, if I mentioned that before in our last class. And see that? See how there's like a line that's darker? That's what we call the bead. And we just basically keep adding to that as we go down. So I go down. And the reason we're doing it this way versus other ways is this gives us the least amount of contact with the paper. Because you can do it willy-nilly, that's fine. But if you intend to do other glazes or washes on top, you want to disturb the surface of the paper as little as possible. In fact, I'm not scrubbing this in. And you can start left or right if you're a lefty. I tend to go right to left. But see how that bead of water is coming down with each stroke. And normally I do this a lot more quickly, but because this is a smaller amount, I can do this to show you. See, and then we'll get to the next line. But yeah, I'll show you. This is a lot slower than I normally go. Normally I'd go about like that, like that. And then when we get to the bottom, it's of paramount importance that we don't let this lie here. It'll start going back up and causing those blooms that we were talking about last time. So you take your brush and you use it to soak in that last bit of paint. Okay, like that. Not too much though. And there you have a relatively flat wash. Now for the next one, we're going to do what's called a graded wash or a gradient wash, and that's where you go from dark to light or light to dark. And this is the most useful for giving form for like skies and distance. Basically, it's the same as what we just did, but you dilute as you go down. And so what we'll do is we'll still have this nice fat amount of paint that we mixed up, because see how much I have left over. And I'll start here. In fact, I might get a little bit darker so you can see it. And then we'll add a little bit of water to the next one very quickly. See, I was losing my bead, so you gotta make sure you get that going. A little bit more water. Keep going down while it's drying. It's drying very quickly today. We're actually having some dry weather in Colorado, so take that into account, how much moisture you got going. I'll get a little bit more water. In each stroke, you just use a little less going down, and see how the gravity is pulling it down to make that bead. A little more water. And then towards the end, I might almost use just pure water by itself a little bit. Soak up that last bit. But you can see, like, if this was a sky, you would have this dark top, and then it gets lighter and lighter into the horizon. And then you alternatively, you can flip it over and have the lightest lights here, and it gets darker and darker. I'll do that a lot in water scenes. And so that is the flat wash, the graded wash. In fact, let me write that down. And then next, what do you think it'll be? It's going to be either what they call a blended wash or a variegated wash. It's got several names, but basically it's a wash where you change from one color to another, sometimes several colors. And this is really great for sunrises and sunsets or shadows. The main thing with variegated wash is to make sure that you're using pigments that mix together well. In this case, we're going to take two colors like Permanent Rose, which are right next to each other, which is this one, and Ultramarine Blue, because those two work really, really well together. And this other orangey red that we used, it'll make more of a muddled purple, because Ultramarine is a warm blue and Permanent Rose is a cool red, as they say. So I'll mix up amount of that, basically about half of what we did for the other one. I think you can see me doing this. Another trick is if you're using a very nice brush, this is a synthetic, it can take this kind of a drubbing, but I would recommend if you have like a very nice Kolinsky Sable or a very soft brush to use a different brush for mixing that you don't mind getting beat up, because over time doing this, that's one of the few setbacks to using pans is you do end up wearing down your brushes over time. Make some more blue. And another thing you can do when you're doing these, and I didn't do this in class, but if you really want a super smooth transition, it really helps if you pre-mix more than just the two colors. And I'll show you what I mean here. I'll take this out. All right. And I'll take this blue and a little bit of the rose, and we'll do a pre-mix of both of them right here and here. And then we'll do the same up here with a little bit more on the red side. Oops. But see, it's going to be slightly more reddish like that, but not pure rose. Same thing with this one. It'll be more on the blue side. And the reason it's good to mix these ahead of time is if you're working really large especially, this will make it even more of a smooth gradation. So we'll start with the blue at the top. Make sure we got a little bit more blue. There we go. Okay, and you have to work really fast, so make sure you get that bead. There we go. Okay. Into the next color. Move into the next one that's a little more blue. Sorry, I did this backwards. All right, hang on. I meant to say more pinky. So I did this backwards. All right, there we go. Do this one here. Then we'll do the more bluish one. I mean, more pinky one. Yeah, and because I made that hesitation, you can see it's streaking. So I'm going to go back in with the blue. I'm going to flip it upside down. And then pure pink at the bottom. So yeah, make sure you're paying attention to which mix you're putting in order. There we go. Now I'll suck that up at the bottom with the brush. Okay. Yeah, if you pay attention to your mixes, you won't have the trouble I just had. There we go. bit of pink at the bottom, just to really emphasize the pink. But these are the trickiest kinds of washes, in my opinion, are these mixed or variegated color washes. But once you pull them off, they're pretty cool. There we go. And you can also move them back and forth if you feel that one color needs to bleed down more than the other. Okay. And the last one is perhaps my favorite I'm going to talk about on this page, and that's going to be a broken wash. And what do I mean by a broken wash? Basically, whenever you see me do clouds or other irregular patches, like, you know, in the ocean or fields, what I'm doing is I'm taking water and I'm just lightly, it's going to be hard for you to see this. Let me get a lamp and put it to the side. But I'll be dragging the water across very lightly and leaving white bits of paper that aren't actually touched. Like that. Then I take a mix. Let's just use that blue there. And I make it very neat, as they say, not a lot of water. And I will drag it across very lightly. And as you can see, where the water was, it's starting to bleed out in. And that is a really great way to make a natural looking sky. In fact, you could even get burnt sienna or burnt umber and tickle it across very lightly on the bottom. So it looks like it could be snow or something like that. And then, while it's still damp, you can even go back in and make some distant suggestions of trees. That's a broken wash. Write these in. So we have, once again, flat wash, graded wash, variegated wash, broken wash. And so what we can do now, once this is completely and utterly bone dry, you can even take your hair dryer to it once it's set. We don't want to waste paper, so we'll just flip this over. You can even save the tape. Be careful with it. And also, just to reiterate, these were all basically what they call wet on dry washes, meaning that we had the dry paper and then we put in the very wet pigment and did our thing with it. But there is yet another kind of wash that actually has a lot of subsets of washes under it, and that's going to be the wet on wet. So let's set this up real quick. So wet on wet is exactly what you would imagine, where you take clean water and you lay it down quite heavily. I would recommend going in different directions, because that will give you a little bit more of an even buckle, because it will buckle. And when you look at the sheen, you know, look to see which direction it is. All right, there we go. So again, don't lay it down too much. And so what we're going to do is, first of all, we're just going to do what I like to call a diagonal wash or a directional wash. So you'll take your paint, let's take the blue again, and I make it very neat. Once again, almost pure pigment, not a lot, because you've already charged this up with a lot of water. And we'll just take it and go. And then we'll just let it go downwards in a diagonal form. This is really great for stormy skies, or things where you just need a nice flow and direction. So let that, oops, got that on the edge, got carried away. We'll just let that dry. You see now that it's mostly dried, how it really softened those edges. And now we can do a similar thing. So there it is with the direction. And do a different direction, going this way. Once again, just completely wet that down. And a lot of this becomes intuitive when you're knowing how much water needs to be soaked into the paper. You want it to have a sheen to it, but not be floating on top. So I put it down and I let it sit there for a little bit. And once again, it varies from paper to paper, from how much humidity is in the room or outside. But see how it's damp, but not, see how this is too much water. You don't want that. You just kind of let it soak in before you take your paint and make it very strong, strongly pigmented or neat. And this is still a little bit too wet, so I'm going to wait about maybe 30 seconds to a minute. You might need to wait longer if you're watching and you're in a much more damp climate. So let's just take another second. All right, so I position once again on that angle. It's about a 30-degree angle. You can even do it a little bit more if you need to. And we'll just go streaking this way. And this time, in addition to having the blue, I'm going to take that permanent rose and I'm going to go from the other direction. fill that in. Go back into the blue. Might have made it too neat. Like I said, it's a little drier today than I expected. Okay. All right, and do your best not to mingle too much. Let the paint do the work for you as much as possible. Okay, so we're going to let that dry. And just a quick reminder that when your water gets this dark, time to switch it out. All right, so now we have our directional washes. We've got the one with plain water, we've got the one with the other pigment. And once again, it doesn't have to be diagonal. I just did that because it's easiest to see, but you could, do it this way, or move it as it's drying, which is a lot of fun, but very chaotic. And just to show you what else I use wet on wet washes for, because there really is 100 different things you can do with it, but it is tricky. So you can lay down the water again. I find it's really great for when you're trying to do super soft edges. That's you can do in other mediums, but boy, it takes a lot more work than watercolor. With watercolor, the water will do the blending for you if you practice enough with it and are content to let water take the wheel, as it were. All right, so when I wetted this down. Once again, I'm letting it go this way, and I'm going to tilt it up a little bit because I want it to be more flat. And let's say that I want to make a round shape without hard edges. So I'll make it once again very neat, and I will go like that. And see how it's just going outward in all directions because it's flat, or flat as I can make it. Okay. And it's got that lovely starburst going on. Then I'll take the blue, very neat again, and I'll go around it. And I'll very carefully go right up to that edge, like super careful. And then fill in the rest. And it will give me a nice soft edge to that shape. It won't be hard. So we'll let that dry. But see, now that it's dry, see how soft those edges are? Go in like that. All right, and so I went back up and over so you can see a hard edge versus a soft edge. And once again, you don't want to do more than 2 different layers or so, or it starts to pill up a little bit. And I think that is a slight disadvantage with this paper, even though it's way less expensive, just to keep that in mind. And we're going to talk more about that when we do glazes next time. So soft edges. And then finally, this is my favorite one of all, where you just get everything wet, just like we have before for all these wet on wet washes. Super nice and wet. And once again, this one works better if you hold it more upright than at an angle like I've been doing with the directional washes. And you take whichever colors you're wanting to play with. Once again, try to get ones that play together well. And you take it very neat. Get as much as you can. And then you just basically boosh. You can even do several together. Then you can add a different color. Let's try this cadmium red hue again. Now this will behave a little bit differently than the permanent rose, but let's give it a go. This is great for doing backgrounds that are like of greenery or, you know, snow. I'm just using two different colors so you can see the difference a little better. Drop some of that in. And once again, it's a timing game because it will spread less the more it dries. See how that's already dry in the corner? You can also use this to make flowers like I showed in the last video. But see how it's much more muted in its effect, so you can go back in, need be. But the secret is make sure it's even less wet than before. Just go. You get these really neat organic shapes. And if you're really feeling adventurous, you can even move your paper around and get different effects. All right, so now we have had our directional washes. We've had an example of soft edges that we can get to blend them together. You could also call that a blended wash. And then we have our random drop-in of colors, and you can play around with that and move it as it goes. I chose to just do it straight to show you the neat little starburst or flower patterns you can get. Just have fun with this. Wet on wet is perhaps the most challenging of washes, and there is an infinite amount of ways of doing it. I just showed you a few. Just play with it, see what you can come up with, and I will see you next time in class.